Futures trading involves substantial risk of loss and may not be suitable for all investors.
Good morning. It's Friday, November 14th. I'm Phil Streible, Chief Market Strategist at Blue Line Futures. So precious metals, they are correcting as the odds of an interest rate cut in December, they collapse. So the question is the top in on precious metals? So copper and silver, they trimmed their weekly gains after China's economic activity had cooled more than expected here in October. That really weighs in on the demand outlook for the world's top metal consuming country. Slower growth in Chinese industrial production last month and unprecedented slump in investment had really dragged in on the consumption data. Now, copper is still headed for a weekly gain of about 2%, and you get the silver market up about 8%. So you shift to the equity markets for the moment here. Stocks are set to open lower on doubts of whether or not the Fed will cut rates again in December, with some unease deepening about AI valuations and things like that. So you get the S&P 500 down about 0.75%. You get the NASDAQ down about 1%. And you get the Russell down just under 1%. You look at gold futures down $45, sitting at about $41.50. That's down 1%. Silver down about 2% at $52.10, and you get the copper market at $5.05. Copper has surprisingly seen quite a bit of lower volatility in that market, and then also holding above the $5 level. We've seen below $5 as really a value zone here, and then we've seen a signal of higher highs on the chart and higher lows on the chart, which is the makeup here with lower volatility as it becomes a more tradable market as it trends higher. You'll get the platinum market down about $46, and the gold silver ratio sits at about 79-1. So you look at the stocks, they are set to open lower here as doubts whether or not the Fed will cut rates here in December. So you look at the CME's Fed Watch tool, you go to that, you're going to see the markets are now seeing about a 49.6% probability that the Fed will cut rates by about 25 basis points in December. That's down from about 67% a week earlier. You go to the poly market, that's collapsing as well. That's a 51% chance that the Fed will cut rates 25 basis points. So it's really a lot of these Fed speakers also really just throwing some water on that fire here for that Fed interest rate cut. So you look at Minneapolis President Neil Kashkari. He said he didn't support the U.S. central bank's last interest rate cut. He's still undecided on the best course of action for December. You go to the dollar index here, pushing up about 0.2% at 99.23. You got a sea of red across the screen when you look at the foreign FX markets, everything from the Australian dollar, which has surprisingly been one of the stronger markets here. Not only their FX and then also their stock indice pushing up, but you look at the Canadian dollar, that's been one of the weakest, as well as the Japanese yen, the euro currency, and you go down the board, it's just nothing but red across the screen. You do have precious metals. They are pushing lower as I'm doing this recording here, so breaking some key levels of support with the silver market pushing below that 52 mark, hitting a new low intraday overnight at 51.90. Now you look at some things here as far as the 10-year interest rate sitting at 4.12%. And why is that? Because of the fact that the Fed looks not to cut rates here in December. So you're seeing those interest rates are holding a little bit higher here than longer than expected. You get the VIX here popping up here over that 20 mark, sitting at about 2140 last. So it's up about 5% on the overnight session. So quite a bit of choppiness, quite a bit of volatility. That's why it's important to be patient. And it's also important when you get volatility going up to take down your positions here, because you're going to see wider swings back and forth on the markets. Now, shockingly, you're seeing Bitcoin continue to correct here below that 100,000 mark, sitting at about 96,000, and it's down $2,000 overnight, or down about 2%. You look at Europe and Asia, well, European stocks decline and Asian stocks, they decline for the first time this week here. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index falling about 1.6%. That's the most since April. So it's really surrounding this Chinese economic activity cooling. That was really the gut punch on a lot of these markets here overnight. So when you look at the earnings front, out of the 461 S&P 500 companies that have reported so far, 82% have beaten the analyst forecast, 15% have mixed. And then you're supposed to get readings here from retail sales and producer price inflation, but it's unlikely to be released. So you go to the ETF flows here. They were buying gold, silver, and platinum. They were selling that palladium market. So year-to-date percentage change, Gold up 17% here, and you get the silver market unchanged here. It's up about 300,000, but not enough to move the needle here. So up 14%. The gold silver ratio sitting at 79-1. So apologize, I'm still sick here. So we'll see if this can shake itself out here as well as these markets here over the weekend. So you guys got any questions? Shoot an email, info@bluelinefutures.com. Remember, futures and option trading does involve risk of loss. May not be suitable to all investors. Good luck, good trading.